As we all know, there are many people who come through the doors of our churches every week who are hurting and in pain and are needed of hope and life. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 6 ways to encourage the people in your church.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Androsian, and sitting next to me is Dylan Dotson. And today we're going to give you 6 ways to encourage people in your church.
And if you're new with us on Practical Church Planting, welcome.
Welcome.
If you're planting within the next 12 months or so, be sure to check out practicalplanting.com. Check out our launch team course. We'll give you highly practical tips, not just raise money and build a team, but actually how to do it. Plus, there's a lot of free resources there if you haven't checked it out before. Practicalplanting.com, a lot of free stuff. We even sent out a weekly newsletter with a free church media, social media guide. I say this unapologetically. If you don't want a weekly newsletter from us, but you want the free church planting social media guide, put your email in, get it, and then unsubscribe.
That's right.
We just want to help you. So check that out. Today we're talking about 6 ways to encourage people in your church from the standpoint of, like, if you want to love your people well and you want to encourage them and you want to see them take steps, doing it winsomely, I think is a lot better job than doing this heavy-handedly. And I think that's what Jesus did to us as well. So we're going to talk about practically 6 ways that you can do this to encourage people and really to create a culture of, you got to talk about hard stuff, obviously, but like a place that people want to go and want to experience life change. So here we go. How to encourage the people that are coming to your church, your congregation. Number 1 is to speak highly and to speak well of your people. So one of the things that can happen, maybe it's different now than it has been. Maybe it's just been a little bit of a shift, but there's this, a tendency is not the right word, but maybe there can be a tendency to nag is probably not the right word either, but guilt people into doing things, to behave a certain way, to live a certain way. And I think sometimes that can happen because if you're a ministry leader and you have conversations with people who are really making bad decisions, and so you're projecting that onto everybody without realizing that if people are showing up, particularly now, to your church, or if they're engaging in any way, they're doing it because most of them want to be there in some capacity. Maybe their motivations aren't entirely pure, not all of them, but they're there. And so one of the things you can do to encourage people in church is to speak well of them. So if you're preaching on a particular passage and it's something that you have seen done well in your church, you should say, this is one of the things that we do well, or one of the things that we want to continue to do well. I even think, even privately, because I think a lot of this spills over, but even when you're in conversations with maybe other ministry friends or people who are not associated with your church, if you like your church and you are grateful for your people, to talk about that, to talk about how grateful you are for the people in your church. Obviously, there's hard people and there's caveats and that sort of thing. But I don't know. I feel like the more that you talk about it, I don't feel like this is psychology.
Yeah.
The more that you believe it, and the more that you will behave in a way that it's actually true, if that makes sense. And so I just would encourage you, anytime when you're preaching or talking about your church, if they're doing it well, to encourage them and to just talk well about your people in general, even to people in your church, to tell them how grateful you are for them. I think if you do this every once in a while and it feels forced, then people won't believe it. But if it's a thing that you do, people would believe it and they'll be encouraged by it. So I don't know if this one seems obvious or not, but I just think it's something that we should do, and you shouldn't worry, well, if I say they're doing a good job, then they're not going to care about these other things. I think it can make a big difference just speaking highly of your people.
I think speaking highly of your people outside of church is seems obvious, but is a less obvious thing. It's at least from my perspective. I feel like it's, especially when you're talking about with other pastors and stuff, it's just the easy thing to default to. Here's what's going wrong. COVID made everything tough, and so everyone has different political opinions, and that's going on in my church. And I feel like it's always just I shouldn't say that. It's kind of sometimes can be a complaint fest, and so I feel like it's so much more common to hear the negative things than the positive things. Where and do not get me wrong, if there's negative things and you have pastor friends you can talk about it with, that's a good place to talk about it, and you shouldn't be hiding those things. But there's probably positive things going on in your church as well. So, I agree. I think it spills over to everywhere. If from the pulpit you're trying to say positive things, but everyone else you're talking about, it's only the negative things, it's just gonna spill over into how you communicate with people, how you're treating people in your church. And so definitely be honest about the struggles. Don't try and sugarcoat them, but just try and recognize the positives too. And when you're talking to people outside of the church, talk about the good things that are going on in your church, because people want to hear it. I think a good question to ask other pastors is what are you struggling with, but also what are you celebrating? What's good happening in your church, because people need to be able to communicate the positives along with the negatives.
So if you want to encourage people in your church, speak highly of them when it's true. I mean, don't lie.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are doing a lot of great things, and so don't focus on just the few negative things and never talk about the good things that God is doing. So, number 2, I think this one's important, is to celebrate your differences. And there's a lot of ways you could do this: political differences, differences in response to COVID, just the differences in terms of the sin issues that you've dealt with, people are struggling with. As a joke, maybe in the sports world, if you're in an area with college teams or pro teams, and there's like a divide, I think what can happen. This is all anecdotal, and we can only speak from our experience. So I get that, but I think one of the things that really fractures churches is trying to pretend that we all think and act and vote the same way, and like celebrating that we're all like a monolith, and as opposed to like during political season, like I think it's good to actually celebrate that you have people who politically disagree.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, and if you don't like actually say that, people will assume that we all have to be the same way. And if someone is different, then there's something wrong with them. Rather than saying, we've got people who are on different sides of the political spectrum here, but we have found something that unifies us greater than even that, and that's Jesus. I think people are like, that's right. People are different, and that's okay. If it's all about you have to vote the same way, and you've got to do all the same things, and you have to have all the same hobbies, and you have to all dress the same, if there is any difference, it can lead to a lot of fracturing. Now, I'm not saying celebrate like if something is sinful and wrong. I'm not saying like, yay, look at all this. But I think going out of your way to highlight that your church is full of people who are different actually makes it more unified, because it's like we're not the same, and our goal is not to be the same in all of these things. Our goal is to follow Jesus, knowing that we're different, and knowing that we're broken, and knowing that some of us are doing some really bad stuff, and some of us are doing okay in life right now. But I think it's just an encouragement to your people to know not everyone is like you, and we actually celebrate that so that they see that as a positive thing and not as a danger.
And I think it's helpful to celebrate these differences, and also, and I'm not sure what the right way to put this is, but like talk about the negative aspects of them too, if that makes sense. I know we're talking about encouraging, but what I mean by that is, especially if we're talking about, like, let's just continue with the politics example, and you're, whatever, in your sermon, you're talking about respecting people on the other side. If you know the majority of your congregation is one political leaning or the other, it can be easy to, whether on purpose or accidentally, just address that one.
Yeah.
Even if you're addressing the issues, like even if you're saying, hey, I know most of you are, Republican, and we need to, whatever, treat Democrats better. Obviously more than that, but like if you're just talking to one side, then it can make someone who's on the other side think, well, this is maybe not maybe there's no one here that believes or thinks like me. And so celebrate both sides, but also talk about the issues with both sides as well, and not just focusing on what you think the majority may be, because you may be right. That may be what the majority is, but I'm sure that there are people in your congregation that think and believe kind of on the opposite side as well, and so you want them to be included.
There's probably a minority that don't think that, and they'll probably will feel like they're not welcome.
Yeah.
If it's always assumed that everyone thinks the same way, and so we address everything from the same perspective.
Yeah.
I would encourage you not just, and you might know there's differences because you talk to a lot of the people in your church, but the average person doesn't.
Sure. Yeah.
And so if you don't highlight that it's okay to be different, and I don't know if celebrate's always necessarily the right word depending on what the situation is, but saying like it is okay that we think this way, but we have something greater. I just think it's encouraging to know and to remind people like, oh yeah, not everyone's like me. Isn't this awesome?
Yeah.
That we have found something that's greater than all of our differences. And so
exactly.
Celebrate your differences, whatever it might look like. If it's organic in the sermon, I would bring it up to show people we're different, but God has brought us together. I think that's an encouraging thing.
Yeah.
Number 3, track prayers and pray for your people. I've tried to do this various ways, and now I'm on attempt. I don't know, but so far I like this new attempt.
Okay, I'm interested because I've also tried different ways and haven't succeeded.
I just I'm really tired of the digital stuff. I've done like with Todoist and all that sort of thing, like making a list of prayers, or I've even tried prayer apps, but none of the prayer. I think I've talked about this one on here a while ago. I don't remember where it is, but I know we've talked about it here. Like none of the prayer apps do what I want them to do, because I guess what I want them to do is not the normal. I don't know. I don't feel like it's not abnormal.
Yeah.
But none of them do what I want. And I also I don't like looking at my phone. Like I don't really want to see my phone until I'm leaving the house in the morning. But if like it's part of prayers or whatever, I have to open it and I can see like I have texts that I haven't read, and I just don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't want to touch my phone. And so what I decided to do, what I'm doing now, we'll see how it lasts, is I got note cards, and I most recently emailed everyone in the church and got a good amount of responses. Obviously, not everybody. And I have this note cards. I ended up putting them in alphabetical order because then when I would move them around, I would forget what the order was, and I'm like praying for the same thing, for the same people every single day because I never get through it.
Yeah.
Anyway, write their name down, write the prayer requests, and I go through a handful of them a day, and just slowly cycle through them, and I'll just keep going through them. And the way to do it this way though is I have this little pouch. One of my wife's old makeup pouches is the best thing I have right now.
Nice.
Because I want to bring it with me. Like I want it to be at my house, but I also want it to be here in case somebody emails me or whatever. And I just always want to have it. And so I just put it in my little work bag and bring it with me wherever I go. And I have a little sticky note and I have them in alphabetical order. And so whichever the one I stay on, the last one I read it's on the top, but it's also like a little sticky note tabs on it. That way, if I need to add or edit something, I know where I was if I need to like add a card or whatever.
Yeah.
I put it in alphabetical order because it's a lot easier to do it that way. Anyway, I'm liking it so far. It was really cool when I sent the email out to everybody in our church was I do feel like you get these, like, how can I pray for you? And if you're like me, it's like, okay, like I'll tell you this thing, but like, I don't know if you're really going to pray for me. So I don't really feel like it.
Yeah.
But what I did was because I wrote it on a physical card, I emailed everyone back a picture of the card.
Yeah.
And then I had some people tell me more. Because I think they were like, oh, he actually did this.
Yeah.
And I also like this idea too, because now it's just like keeping all people's stuff in front of me so I can remember it more on Sundays, or I've texted some people some things like, hey, I prayed for you this morning. And I mean, it's just cool when you track these things. I've already seen God kind of do some cool things that I wouldn't have seen if I wasn't having like a consistent thing. And so regardless of the size of your church, I mean, if New City was a big church, that probably wouldn't work this way. But like, you don't have to get through all of them. And I just like do a couple every morning. Some of them I go quicker, some of them go longer, and I just stay where they are. And then the next day I pray through a few more. And some of that will be really repetitive over time, but it would allow me to follow up more, ask people about it because it'll be on my mind. And so that's how I've done it. Again, I don't know if it worked, but it was really cool seeing. I think people appreciated them seeing a picture that I wrote it down.
Yeah.
Now you could do a screenshot of something too.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I don't know if this will work at all. I just installed that little box outside my office door, which is in the lobby, because I just found, and I don't know why. I mean, people just assume that you're busy. We talk about this all the time. Like at church, our church is not that big. And on Sunday mornings, it's like, if I'm talking to someone for more than 2 minutes, very often they're like, oh, I know you got other people to talk to. And it's like, it's okay. Like, this is my job. So I put this sign outside my office. It's got a frame that says, I forget what it says. How can Pastor Dylan pray for you? Which feels weird to say it, but I wanted to know like it was me, not just some generic thing. And it's got like a box with some pens and a piece of paper. And I don't know if people will use it, but I'm hoping people will drop it in there as an easier way, especially if they feel like I'm talking to somebody or whatever when they're here on Sunday, to drop that in, and then I can follow up with them that way as well.
Yeah.
But that's what I've tried now. These note cards. We'll see how long this one lasts.
That's an interesting one. I think it's. I mean, I think it's good to have something, and may not be a perfect something, or you may not have found the perfect something yet, I guess is a better way to put it. But don't let that discourage you from, or don't let that make you do nothing. Because I mean, I've definitely fallen to the trap of like, I've tried these different apps before. I think Echo is like the big one, or at least it used to be. I don't know if it still is. And they're all fine. I don't like opening apps, like I just don't like having more stuff. And so I'd like, if I don't
phone feel heavier.
exactly. Like, I don't know. I just didn't like having to go into something different that I wasn't already going into. And so I'd find myself not really using it because part of it because I wasn't in the habit of using it.
Is this an argument against church apps? Sorry.
Ooh, yes. Listen, I have an argument against a lot of apps. But for a while that would just kind of like left me at a state of just like trying to remember things because I couldn't find a good tool to do it, which is obviously my memory is worse than all the tools combined. And so find something that's good, whether it's note cards or writing down on a notebook or just something, but a good starting place. And don't let the fact that there may not be any wonderful tools out there stop you from doing.
Yeah, it's like anything. Just try it.
Yeah.
And you'll probably change it. As I was writing all these things by hand, I was kind of like, I'm not sure if I'm going to like this, but at least it'll get me to somewhere else. So sometimes you just got to invest the time that way. So track prayers and pray for your people. I think that can be really helpful. And not just like I'm going to pray for them, but actually have it written down somewhere, keeps you in front of mind and you're actually praying for it. And when you actually pray for things, you actually get to see how God answers them if you do it more than once. So,
and as like a tip little, 2B or whatever, let people know you're praying for them. Like, obviously, if you have a small list and you're cycling through them every week, I don't know that you have to text someone every single week.
Right.
But this helps you not just like remember to pray for them, which is most important, but also a reminder that you're to let them know that you prayed for them, especially if it's not necessarily like that day that they asked for it. But a few weeks down the road, it's easy to forget some things. But I've definitely had times where I'd kind of forgotten something and remember to pray for it, but maybe it's like early in the morning or something like that. I'm not going to text them, at 5 in the morning. But then later that day, I don't remember to text them to let them know, like, hey, I'm praying for you today. And so I think that's some system is a good way just to remind you to pray for it, but also to let them know you're praying for them as well.
Yep. So that's how you encourage people. Track your prayers and pray for them. Number 4 is to reach out to people when they made an impact. And this is pretty easy to do and maybe often overlooked at how important it can be when you see someone on a Sunday go out of their way. Maybe it was a small thing, but it was clearly out of their way to do something kind. Or if somebody in the church mentions how somebody impacted them, to email them or to text them and say, hey, this happened. Or if you prayed for something. So a couple weeks ago, as I was going through these cards, or not this past Sunday, the Sunday before, one of the people that I was praying for, I didn't have her on her card, but she's newer to New City. And so I was just praying that, like, if she happened to be there this Sunday, that somebody would talk to her and connect with her. And then after service, she was sitting next to another woman at our church I saw, and I was like, well, this will be great because she's really friendly. And this woman was laughing and she was talking and like she was smiling, which I haven't seen her do very much since she's been here.
Yeah.
And so I emailed the person that she was talking to later that Sunday night, and I was like, hey, I just want you to let you know, I was actually praying for this morning. You were an answer to her prayer, and you didn't even know this.
Didn't know, yeah.
And she emailed me back, and she was just like saying like how amazing that was and how encouraging it was for her, because she's been having a hard time with this thing, and that was just like made her week. And I mean, it took me 30 seconds. The thing here's what I found: when things are really quick and easy, they're also easy to dismiss. So it could be like, it's not that big of a deal. But when you do that and people see the impact that they're making, it really encourages them. And so obviously you don't want to like lie or whatever, but if you see something, find a way and put a note on your phone or whatever and send that email or that text or that call or whatever. It might not take you very much time, but it'll make a really big impact for them to know that God was using them. And so reach out to people when they make an impact is a great way to encourage them.
Yeah, and like sometimes it's like the smaller the thing, the better to reach out for. Because obviously, I mean, it's good to reach out for big things, but if you see someone who's, I don't know, like kind of similar situation, like someone who went up and talked to someone who was standing by themselves, just shooting them an email, and it's not that you're making a huge deal out of it, but like, hey, I saw you do this, and I know this may be a little outside of your comfort zone, but I appreciate that, and it made them feel welcome. Like it's a 2-second thing. But it's like, man, or the pastor or whoever it was that emailed me, like they actually saw that I did something and saw that I did that. And it's not that you're like trying to make it seem like a bigger deal than it is of like, you've changed that person's life or whatever. But it's like, no, you legitimately did make some sort of an impact, whether it's big or small, and just letting people know that you're actually seeing them. And obviously you're not going to see everything. And I think this is a good, I mean, all these would be good, but especially this one is a good one to encourage if you have a staff yet, like encourage your staff or your leadership team. Like, hey, be on the lookout for these things as well. And they don't all have to like be sent to you, pastor, to communicate to them. But as a leader in the church, whether it's staff or elder or whoever, like, you reach out to people too. And that's part of your job. Part of your job, in my opinion, is like let people know when they're doing a good job, and whether that means someone that's serving or just a regular person who's in the church. I think even just like a short little quick word or quick email is really effective.
That's right. So reach out to people when they make an impact. Number 5, when preaching on challenging topics, encourage your church, knowing many are striving after Jesus. So that was a wordful. So I'll say it one more time and I'll explain it. When preaching on challenging topics, encourage your church, knowing many are striving after Jesus. So what can be the tendency is talking about sexual sin or whatever. Now, you probably wouldn't say it this way, so I'm being dramatic here, but it's like all of you that are sleeping around, you need to stop it right now. And I mean that in the sense of like you're assuming that nobody's actually trying or caring. Or someone's been doing this, and maybe you've talked about it a couple times, and you're assuming that they don't care. However, I would say no, this isn't always the case, but if they're still showing up and they're still talking to you, it probably means that they care at least to some degree. Maybe they should be taking more, doing more about it, but that was care.
Yeah.
And so my encouragement is, because it is true that like we can easily focus on a few people that really annoy us or that we're really frustrated with, or the conversation we had that week, and like project that onto everybody. And so when you're talking about giving financially or serving with your time or any of the things that Jesus, encourages us to do as a way to love people, talk about the truths of it, but then encourage them knowing that many of them are trying to take steps. Now, they might need to take more steps. They might just need to be told what those steps are because they don't know what it is. And so we shouldn't get frustrated with people. Like, part of it is our job to help them figure out what those steps are.
Yeah.
But I would just, like, from the posture of people need to stop and they don't care, they need to start caring. I think the better posture is, I think a lot of them do care. How can I encourage them to continue taking steps? Now, again, your context and the particular topics. And so maybe you know that nobody cares. And so you have to, but I just think a much better way to do it is to talk about those topics and encouraging them almost like assuming that like, yeah, assuming that they want to care as opposed to trying to convince them to stop or to start doing whatever it is, I think can be a really big encouragement to your people.
Yeah. And I think this kind of goes back to the first point of like, don't, I don't think you can always 100% assume the very best of everybody, because you do have to address issues that are in the room and stuff. But don't always assume the worst of 100% of the time. Like,
Right.
some of your people are genuinely trying. I mean, every church, I guarantee there's someone who's like genuinely trying, and they may be failing, but they're trying. And so just getting up there and railing against people for whatever the issue is, I don't think it gets you many places. And I don't think that's. I don't know. I don't think that's the way to do it. But I mean, and this isn't like sugar coated of like, I know you're all doing your best, and so this isn't a big deal, whatever. But it's like, be honest about whatever you're preaching on, but also acknowledge that like people may actually be striving to do this or to accomplish this, and they may need more encouragement than I don't know, railing against them. Yeah. One thing I was going to add to this, which this wasn't really like, this is like another like point B. When I was looking at these earlier, is one thing that I think that you did well a few months ago, which kind of goes along with this, is reaching out to people after a sermon touches on something that you know has affected them. And what I'm divorce. Yeah. And what I mean by that is like, obviously if you're preaching on like sexual sin, you're not going to reach out to people and be like, I know you have sex with a lot of people, so this might have been painful. But like but we preach on divorce. Like, it was the passage that we came across. And then I remember that I think it was like that day in person, not necessarily later in emails. But there's a few people that obviously we're small enough to where we know a lot of people that have had divorces in the past, and whether for biblical or unbiblical reasons. I remember you saying, oh, you were going to try and catch up with them just to check in and say like, hey, and like, I know this affected you. And not, I mean, you can weigh in more than I can, but like, not necessarily to make like a huge deal of it, but like, I know this affected you, and I want you to know that we actually care and want to like encourage you in something that, whether you're currently struggling with it or is in the past, but that this isn't just like something we're preaching on, but we actually want to encourage you in your faith, because I know this is something that would have touched a nerve with you.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think I think something like that can be helpful.
Yeah. And so I think all that to say, like, saying things like, hey, if you're talking about, because we keep using this example, sexual sin.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, like, I know many of you are trying to take steps,
mm-hmm.
and I know for so many it's been really hard, as opposed to saying quit it.
Yeah.
Because then it's like,
yeah.
Oh, he is acknowledging whether or not we think people are doing what we think they're supposed to be doing. And a lot of people's mind, they are trying. And
mm-hmm.
and so again, we're not trying to water everything down and just like give everyone participation trophies. Mm-hmm. But I just think being winsome as opposed to being, I don't know, obligatory is a much better approach. And I'm not just like Jesus drew you, but I think that the gospel is like a winsome thing. Like Jesus did this for us, and he's inviting us in, and that recognizing his grace is what causes us to take steps. And so,
yeah. And I think talking in the sense of like quit it can also communicate that I've beaten this.
Yeah.
And so why haven't you?
And almost like you're not welcome here if you haven't.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I gotta tell you, like, obviously, you know, sin issues can vary in levels of severity and things, but like, there's a lot of sin issues I can't say like beaten, you know, like 100%, never gonna be a struggle again.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, you know, we're talking about, like, we're striving and making efforts towards it, and maybe some are like further towards that, down that accomplishment line than others. But to just come up and be like, you got to quit it, you got to stop, and whatever, can definitely communicate like, I got this under control, mm-hmm. and you don't. And I don't necessarily think that comes across as like holier than thou. I think people look at that as like, you're lying. Like, you're I know you don't have this 100% beat. Not like, I know this is a huge struggle of yours, but you're saying that you're talking kind of like you're sinless, like you don't have any struggles. And when you're communicating like that, and I don't think it necessarily comes across as like, oh, this guy's pompous. I think it comes across as like, oh, this guy's a liar. And so I don't know. I don't think it's good for you, the pastor, but I don't think it's good for your people either.
Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense of that jumbled point when
yes.
preaching on challenging topics. Encourage your church, knowing many are actually striving after Jesus.
Yep.
Which leads to the last point. Always remember you are preaching to wounded people. This has been helpful for me earlier this year. Scott Sauls, who's a pastor, he tweeted this way. I put it in our Facebook group a while ago too, the Practical Church Planning Facebook group. He said, great advice from a pastor who is about 15 years ahead of me. When you stand up to preach, never forget how many people in the room are overwhelmed, under-encouraged, and fighting hidden battles. When it's time to convict, only do so with kindness. And then you know how like Twitter is. It's like, well, you know, what about someone who needs to hear the truth, whatever? You know what's going on. But generally speaking, again, people are. This true. This tweet is true. They're overwhelmed, unencouraged. They're struggling. It's hard. They got there, and again, I'm not trying to say, yeah, you're just here at church, so we're just gonna keep patting you on the back. But I'm saying like people, if you can be winsome and kind and loving and still be truthful, like that is what people gravitate towards, and that is what helps encourage people to take steps, not out of guilt or obligation, but out of here's what could be for you, if you see who Jesus is. And so I think again, remembering, even if you had a hard week, even if you had a conversation or two with people that really frustrated you that week, that there are people that are walking into your doors that week that are like extremely hurting and wounded. Now, you know that, especially if you do this prayer thing we talk about, you'll know what's going on. But also just life can happen, and someone that you could know well could have an awful week.
Yeah.
And something could have happened that you didn't know about, because it happens to all of us. Every once in a while, we all go through something that like is out of nowhere. Like it's really, really tough. Guarantee you that's at least once a week. No matter how small or big your church is, you've got somebody who like is just not in a good spot.
Yeah.
And remembering that, I think, can help you when you're preaching. Again, you're still honest. You still speak the truth. You still talk about all these things, but you do it in a way that's kind and gracious, in a way that like how Jesus does it for us. And so anyway, always remember you're preaching to wounded people. I think that's one of the best things you can do to help encourage your people, particularly on a Sunday morning.
Yeah. I don't know why we can get the idea that truth and kindness have to be like opposites of each other. Like if we talk about like preaching kindly and people saying, well, no, you just need to preach the truth. It's like, well, you can. Like you can tell people what they need to hear and tell people, preach the gospel and preach about sin issues and all these things. And you can do so kindly and not in an accusatory manner, but while not watering down, the truth of what actually needs to be communicated. And so I don't know. I agree. I mean, you're preaching to wounded people. You are also a wounded person. And one thing I've tried to keep in mind is it's hard to do sometimes, but like sometimes I try and keep in mind, if I heard someone preaching what I'm preaching, how would I respond to it? Because we were talking about this earlier today. I have had times where I've gotten kind of in a position where I felt like I was being kind of condescending in what I was trying to say, and that obviously, hopefully, I mean, that wasn't my intent, but intent doesn't matter when you're communicating.
Well, you're also like an Enneagram 1, so like you're like the perfect type, right? So everyone has
the perfect type just in general?
Isn't that what it's perfectionism? That's the thing.
I like the perfect type. That's a good way to put it.
Black and white. It's right or wrong.
Right. But like if I'm preaching in this way and like I know what's going on in my head, I know what I mean. And so I think it's not as bad, but if I just look at the words and think like, man, if someone I didn't know was preaching this and I heard it, what would I think? And that's changed some of the way I've kind of written and communicated some things, because I am also a wounded person and I am also a broken person. And I can't just, take whatever anybody says and just let it roll off as if it's no big deal. And so remembering that people are the same as you, or if not more wounded than you, oftentimes, I think really can help shape the way that you communicate.
Yep. So remember, people preaching are wounded people. Love and encourage them like you would want to be loved and encouraged. And that's a great way to encourage your people.
That's right.
So hopefully this episode was encouraging to you.
Yes.
That was 6 ways to encourage people in your church. Again, things we talked about. Practicalplanting.com. There's resources there. The launch team course is there. The Facebook group, Practical Church Planting,
It's everywhere.
That's the group we talked about. And we do this every week. So thanks for being with us, and we'll be with you next week on Practical Church Planting.